Welcome to The Cusp, a podcast from WorkShift, a nonprofit news organization focused on connections between education and work. I'm Paul Fain, WorkShift's co-founder and the editor of the Job newsletter. It's hard to keep up with developments in artificial intelligence. To help us make sense of what's happening, I spoke in early April with Greg Hart, the president and CEO of Coursera, which is one of the world's largest online learning platforms. The company has a global perspective on the demand for AI-related skills and how the technology is reshaping jobs. Hart took the helm at Coursera earlier this year, but he brought deep experience with tech-driven businesses, having spent 23 years at Amazon, where he led the Alexa Echo work, scaled Prime Video globally, and served as a technical advisor to Jeff Bezos. Without further ado, let's get to the conversation. Greg Hart, thanks for talking with me.
Happy to be here.
So before we kind of get into Coursera and its work, I wanted to ask just generally, how bullish are you about artificial intelligence having a big impact on jobs in the next few years in a way that really is something that I think education providers need to deal with?
A couple thoughts. First, the impact of Gen AI continues to increase and expand. And so you're seeing, the need for not just workforces to adapt, but also individuals to adapt, accelerating. Couple signs of that we see on our platform. So Coursera has 650 different courses on Gen AI. A very broad range of courses, from general courses to very specific courses on the impact of Gen AI in certain specific fields. Those courses in 2023, ChatGPT came out late 2022. In 2023, we saw 1 enrollment per minute in Gen AI courses. 2024, that grew to 6 enrollments per minute. So far this year, we're at 9. So there is just a burgeoning level of interest across all of our learner community in how do I keep current and keep pace. From a company perspective, you're seeing the capabilities of Gen AI continue to expand. So what was possible with Gen AI in 2023 is very different from what's possible today. Gen AI is capable of doing much, much more. And so there was a lot of concern in 2023 on hallucinations and, other things. That concern hasn't gone away, but certainly it's been mitigated by the way that, both the LLM model developers, but also the application of Gen AI within companies has really taken steps to ensure that that's minimized, right? So you're seeing the surface area of what Gen AI can accomplish expand. And companies, therefore, are able to apply that to more and more different types of skills within their workforce. And so it's not so much that you're seeing an entire job go away. It's that you're seeing a bunch of the tasks that a given job performs are able to be automated. And that's generally been the march of technology with software. AI is just accelerating that at a very rapid pace. So we're seeing increasing demand from our partners on the enterprise side around how do I tailor courses that enable me to upskill my employees so that as Gen AI is able to do more of the tasks that a given job function performs, the people in those roles can gain the skills to do higher value activities. And I think that march is just going to continue. And then on the learner side, obviously, we're seeing that same trend play out. They want to stay current. They want to make sure that they're able to, continue to expand their job and their career in a given field, or look at, reskilling and switching fields. If they see that, okay, the field that I'm in, maybe I want to look at, some optionality here and look at different fields potentially. So those are a few of the things that we're seeing play out.
Good stuff. I love the scale that you're able to bring to this discussion, and also the kind of permanent enrollment numbers. Don't know many other entities in the space that talk in those terms, but it's particularly appropriate with AI, which is really, frankly, I think a per-minute developing technology. And I know, even a couple of years back, hearing from Coursera and how you're using it to produce courses at the scale that you offer them. Can you give us a sense of what's possible in this moment?
Well, you've touched on a really interesting dynamic. So, we have 168 million learners. So obviously that gives us exposure to folks all across the world, across all different types of fields of what they're interested in. And I mentioned already the sort of pace of interest in enrollment in Gen AI. You've got this really interesting dynamic where you've got this technological shift playing out that is driving an unbelievable demand for learning about Gen AI and upskilling. And it's the same technological shift that actually enables us to keep up with that. and to help people with that by improving the learning experience itself. So that starts for Coursera with Course Builder, which we launched, and a bunch of these things that I'll touch on, we launched within the first 3 to 6 months after ChatGPT came out. So we very quickly devoted a lot of resources before my time at Coursera to making sure that we were adapting our platform to benefit from these technologies and help our learners with them. So Course Builder is a technology that helps our course instructor creators create courses using AI. So it helps them basically stitch together different elements of the course. It helps recommend things they should add, and it just smooths the process of course creation.
Quick question there. The AI that's embedded in that work, is that something that you all are developing? Or are you tapping, the primary AI labs kind of undergirding technology to do that?
We obviously leverage and benefit from the big, not necessarily open source, but open source and otherwise LLM providers. And then we build our own on top of that. And then occasionally we'll look at specific, external parties that we can work with for a given capability. But generally, we want to make sure that we're not just licensing technology from somebody, but that we're really deeply augmenting whatever that base technology is in a way that's very specific to our needs and our learners' needs. So Course Builder. And then on the learner side, we have Coach. And Coursera Coach is an interactive AI-driven feature that enables learners to really tailor the learning experience to the things that they are struggling with. So, a course might move through things at a given pace, but if as a learner, I'm struggling with mastering the concepts in a given part of the course, I can turn to Coach and have interactive dialogues that help me better understand, okay, these are the key concepts. Now I get it. I can do practice assessments, really help me make sure that I understand it before I move on. We also recently rolled out, actually just last week, within Course Builder, a new item type called Dialogue. And Dialogue enables the instructor, the content creator, whether they're in enterprise or in higher education, to create an AI-driven interactive feature as part of the core construction of the course. And so we'll see more and more of that play out over time. We obviously also leverage AI to do machine translation. So we have over 5,000 courses available in over 26 different languages. You would expect us to continue to do that across different types of modalities.
Gotcha. Thinking again about the scale, I would imagine you all are collecting data you can leverage to improve Coach per se in ways that I would think others maybe can't. I mean, just the scope of the data. Am I right about that, first of all? And how kind of often are you iterating these tools?
That's a great question. So 168 million learners obviously gives us a massive amount of data on what's working really well and where to double down and what maybe isn't working as well as we would like at first blush. And okay, well, how do we improve that? And very frequently, the way that you improve that is by figuring out how to apply AI. We are seeing the pace of experimentation increase. I mean, one of the great things about AI is that it really lowers the cost of experimentation and makes it much faster for you to try new things, see if they work, and then iterate on them. Before AI, if you wanted to do experiments, those took time to code up all the different things that you wanted to do, then run A/B tests, see what was working, what wasn't. With AI, it's much faster to prototype and then moves directly into experimentation mode. So that is a fantastic feature and tool that we're leveraging. And so yes, the pace of experimentation, the pace of augmentation, the pace of our improvement of the experience is going to continue to expand.
You mentioned the increasing demand for AI skills. I'm really interested again in the scale of what you're seeing from a global perspective. Are there regional differences? And if there are regional differences in terms of the demand for specific types of Gen AI skills, is that something that you all can share with the world, like trends that you're seeing on that sort of like student demand?
We're seeing demand increase. A lot of our demand centers around data, software, IT, business. In terms of regional differences, we're seeing an immense amount of interest from India in Gen AI. And so even though, the largest country for us in terms of registered learners is the US, India is a very close second. On Gen AI, we're seeing interest from India outpace interest from the US, which is really interesting. And I think generally we're seeing a lot of interest from emerging markets in that. Part of that may be because of the nature of a lot of the work that is most directly impacted right now is, you see, charts that people talk about, oh, you're going to see customer service type operations be really impacted by AI. A lot of those things have been, offshored and outsourced by, Western companies into emerging markets over the years. And so that might be part of it. I think there's also, particularly in India, it's a country where education is highly valued. And so there's just a natural inclination to be curious and learn about these new technologies.
I was thinking in the customer service piece, like a lot of folks are watching the Philippines to see like how many jobs are eliminated, how many new jobs are created. Fascinating details about India. At some point, do you see India surpassing the United States in overall users?
Well, I mean, the demographics would say yes.
Right.
And so pick your time horizon.
Sure.
But, when you've got, 1.7, 1.8 billion people versus 350 million people, it's only a matter of time for that. And we have, I believe, 31 million registered learners from the US and 28 million from India right now. So they're pretty close. And 3 million people is not a lot in India.
No. Even I can do that math projections. So, I write a lot about the professional certificates, always fascinated by Coursera's role kind of in the middle there. Thinking about, a lower resourced open access college in the United States that's trying to keep pace on AI skills. I don't envy people in that role, but looking at some of the certificates that the big tech companies themselves put together, I've talked with Google a lot over the years. I know that they are regularly updating their AI skills that they embed, I think, in all of them now, in a way that, frankly, I would imagine would be hard to compete with. I get the sense that they put a lot of money and resources into that. And this is a long windup for Google here, but they're also platform agnostic, by the way, which I think a lot of people don't realize with the AI piece. But do you see an advantage for those certificates in the market when it comes specifically to AI skills?
Absolutely. I think there's a huge benefit to having industry partners like Google, like IBM, like Meta, others creating these certificates for two reasons. One, like those are the companies that, are frequently at the forefront of the development of those technologies themselves. So the validity that those certificates bring from those companies is real. Second, they are large employers and they understand how those skills are being applied within their own companies, and also because they have relationships with so many other partners who use their services, they have visibility into what those employers are also looking at, those other enterprises are looking at. Also, they naturally move very quickly as companies. And while we have phenomenal content from our partners in higher education, moving at the pace that private enterprise moves is very hard for a public entity to do. Right. And so it's a great way for those universities, whether it's, a community college or a large, institution with a lot of resources, it's really structurally very hard for them to move at that pace, particularly in these new cutting edge technology things. And so it's a great way where we can help augment the offering that they have. And so the micro credentials and the way that, increasingly we're seeing, not just demand from employers for those micro credentials, but also recognition of the value of those credentials by higher education bodies, and therefore recommending them for credit at the university level is playing out. So we've got, 55 different certificates that are now recommended for credit across ACE or ECTS in Europe or NSQF in India. And I think it's more than 31 are recommended by ACE in the US. I think it's roughly the same number in Europe with ECTS, and I think India's rapidly increasing, but I think it's 10 or 20, something like that now. And I think that will only continue to expand because it's meeting a real need in the market. It's helping, to your point, universities address gaps in their curricula. And those gaps might be because they can't move at the right pace that the industry demands, that the workforce demands. It might be just because they don't have the resources in that given area, right? They're focused on a very specific set of, outcomes for students and therefore a curricula that meets that set of outcomes. And they, this is not their core area of expertise, right? So it's a great way for them to bring in job relevant skills, deliver better outcomes for their students, and not have to invest resources themselves in doing that.
Yeah, and obviously, University of Texas system, a lot of other institutions are experimenting with that. I'm wondering the role Coursera plays in facilitating some of that embedding. Just how does that play out? I mean, you work with these institutions on multiple levels.
We have a fantastic partnership with the University of Texas for exactly that. And so they take those micro credentials and they make those courses available to, I think it's nearly 250,000 people across their entire system. Wow. 240,000 different people across their system, which is fantastic. I think it is a very forward-looking approach from one of the largest university systems in the country. We're also seeing great examples of partnerships like that with SUNY, state universities in New York, and that system. I think those things will become increasingly over time the norm, that universities are just going to recognize, like, hey, particularly in an era where the budgets those universities have might be under threat and might need to really make sure they're focused on the core things that they do best. It's a great way for them, without adding incremental resources on their side and investing their faculty and trying to keep pace with that, for them to bring job relevant skills to their learners.
Assuming, speaking about job relevant, I think, most people that I talk with who actually know things about AI think the next few years are going to be really interesting in terms of job change, job augmentation, and in some cases, probably reducing roles in certain industries, creating new ones. I'm wondering, again, we touched on this a bit, but the amount of data that you all are seeing, are you anticipating that will give you some insight into where jobs themselves are changing in a way that you can tailor some of your offerings?
Absolutely. I'll start with some sort of external data points and then talk a little bit about a bunch of trends that we're seeing play out on our platform, but are also reflected in the broader world. So in 2024, we saw, actually this study is a McKinsey study, came out early this year, so it's probably off 2024 data, but 1 in 4 tech jobs now require knowledge of AI skills. Before ChatGPT came out, that was fewer than 1 in 10. So we're seeing a big increase there. And then looking forward, World Economic Forum forecasts that between now and 2030, so over the next 5 years, 59 out of every 100 jobs in the global workforce will require retraining. That is phenomenal. Like, I don't know what the past measure would be, but I am pretty certain that it's a higher rate than we would have seen in any prior period. We are seeing that same thing in our conversations with our enterprise partners. They are asking us to help them package the skills that their workforce needs. And so we're building learning libraries that help give them the flexibility for the specific pieces of their workforce to give them the skills they need to stay current wherever their job requires. I think that demand will only increase over time. Our goal, and the way we're using some of the data signals we get back from both our enterprise partners, but also bringing in third-party data, is we want to make it very easy, whether you're an enterprise partner or whether you're an individual learner, to understand, okay, this is the field I think I'm interested in, or in the case of enterprise, these are the fields that my employees work in. These are the skills that I develop to be relevant and to stay relevant in those fields. And these are the roles that those skills help me go get, if I'm an individual learner, or stay current in if I'm within a given workforce. We want to tie that ever more tightly together through data, so that we can demonstrate to individual learners, hey, here's the demand we're seeing on the enterprise side, and from just the broader macroeconomic data that we get from labor data providers, and here's how those roles translate to actual salaries. Because what a role looks like, you want to make sure as a learner you understand, oh, well, what's the compensation I can expect if I'm embarking on this path, or if I'm in a given field, what are the skills I need to stay current in that field to make sure that I continue to, not just earn that current compensation, but also help work my way up that career ladder.
Good stuff. I think you said the McKinsey numbers were 59 of 100 job roles. I think it was David Deming at Harvard, some research about how often people are using AI already in their jobs. And one of the things that blew me away, the skilled trades, the numbers are pretty high. Like in construction jobs, folks are using it to write emails. And so I think a safe bet that you're going to see it across a wide range of jobs going forward. Indulge me here on a kind of long wind up. It was a couple of weeks ago. We're speaking in April. The New York Times, Tressie McMillan-Cottom, a columnist, had a piece about AI. She's a professor at UNC, an expert on higher ed. She called AI a mid-technology, one that she predicts is going to be kind of a piffle, and the use cases won't materialize to the degree that many people predict. Among other things that I thought were interesting in the way she made this argument, is she talked about MOOCs. and how, MOOCs had this big hype moment. And then, and I was like, I'm not sure that's the argument you're making here. And because obviously that moment changed online education in some really big ways coming into the pandemic, only more so. And, quoting George Siemens, an expert on both MOOCs and AI, he made a point to us on the show actually about how it reminds him of that moment, the early MOOC moment, where if you don't get on this bus, you may have to outsource some of what you do with AI as a college leader. I don't want to be glib about this. It's really hard to make decisions about investments in AI. Any thoughts? You work with so many college leaders. What sort of frameworks for moving do you see that are taking shape that you would recommend to others?
A couple thoughts. One, I think generally with any new trend or technology, there is a tendency to overestimate the impact in the short term and underestimate the impact in the long term. People are not good at long-term thinking and playing out large technology shifts over time. I think if you went backwards in time and looked at the impact of the mobile phone on society and the way that people connect online and the things that that enables, almost everybody would have underestimated. I think AI will be even more profound, personally. Part of it is the nature of the technology itself, which is very different than the nature of other technologies. So if you think about software, the effectiveness of software has been governed by the pace at which people apply it in new areas and the constraints of things like Moore's law. In the case of AI, it is a technology that it itself learns. That is the nature of artificial intelligence, right? It's the definition of artificial intelligence and machine learning. And so the things that it will be capable of tomorrow are by definition different than the things that it is capable of today. So I think in the long run, the impact of AI will be profound. It will be, equivalent to the Industrial Revolution for humanity. That comes with a lot of challenges that we have to think about as society, but also comes with immense amount of opportunity. And so when I think about it from a higher education perspective, if I'm not thinking today about how I'm adapting my education experience for my students, it's going to be increasingly hard for me to catch up tomorrow. Just because of that, nature of the technology. And the institutions that lean into that and that are really investing in forward thinking are going to be the ones that are best positioned to succeed. I think a lot of that has to come through partnerships, because I think it's going to be very challenging for institutions, particularly smaller institutions, to do this independently and to stay up to speed with their competitors in the higher education space, but also just with the way the technology is developing and changing more broadly. And so I think Coursera has an incredibly important role to play in that, because our foundation as a company is based on those partnerships. Obviously we came out of, the MOOC that Andrew and Daphne did, way back in 2012. And we've grown through partnerships, both with higher education, but also with our partners on the industry side. And those partners are partners who create content, but also are enterprise customers. And so we have this very unique vantage point where we're seeing, both what's working in online education from an academic perspective, but also what's demanded from a job force perspective.
When you talk about partnerships, totally makes sense to me. I've seen, particularly again, lesser resource institutions that I think we all worry more about being able to keep pace. Community colleges partnering up across pretty large consortial arrangements to be able to move together. But who else? What other sectors need to be at the table? Obviously, I would assume business, government, philanthropy. What else do you think needs to be part of that?
I think all of those constituents need to be at the table. Like, each has a different role to play and a different perspective. And they're all, trying to achieve outcomes for their particular, constituents. And so business, obviously, each individual business certainly is thinking about the outcomes for them and for their industry. And oftentimes industry consortiums are going to be thinking about the broader, role the industry has to play and how do we keep expanding that and the impact that that has. Higher education, of course, is focused on learner outcomes and how do they continue to not just stay relevant in a rapidly changing world, but actually increase that relevance over time. And then for governments, AI has profound societal impacts, and they need to be thinking about how do we achieve the right outcomes for our country, whatever country that might be, and how do we harness AI to have those outcomes be better. And obviously there's a lot of things that you have to think through responsibly about how we leverage AI and how we use AI. But I think absolutely partnerships are critical to that across all sectors.
Earlier, you talked about how AI opens doors to less risky experimentation. I'm thinking about, again, the college leader. I think we're past, for the most part, the moment where folks are like plugging their ears and saying, I can ignore this, it'll go away. But I do imagine that there are folks who worry about making investments that don't pan out, jumping on bandwagons that, might not be something that they'll be able to use in a meaningful way. How much risk do you think there is in being an early mover here? Or is it generally, you've got to try, the risks are outweighed by the benefits of trying?
I think there's very little risk in devoting, a portion of your energy and attention to figuring out what type of role AI has to play in an organization, whether that organization is, on the business side or in higher education. Particularly because, as I was saying earlier, the nature of AI itself means the cost, like the actual dollar cost and time cost and resource cost of experimentation is dramatically lowered by AI. And so from a risk perspective, like in that type of environment, you want to be doing as many experiments per unit time as you can, because you just learn faster, right? And so it's applying the scientific method at much lower cost across your organization. And so I think there's very little risk for an institution to say, yes, we need to be doing this experimentation. Could you devote too much energy and attention to it? Potentially, if you're not doing a good job of guiding that, right, and putting the right, frameworks around it to make sure that you're understanding the impact of those experiments. And certainly, because nobody has a crystal ball on exactly the way that will play out, you might be going down the wrong path. But I think you got to be trying a bunch of things and seeing what sticks and what has relevance.
Sure, those are fair arguments. I can't see any quibbles with them. You've been working on AI at scale for a long time, in your previous role, at least a decade, to some degree. Do you think, if we're talking in a couple of years, that the word AI will be less of a thing? That, like the phone, it just becomes ubiquitous? This is an argument I hear a lot, where you won't talk about AI skills, it'll just be skills. Do you see that happening?
So it's funny that you say the word AI. So I led the development of Alexa and Echo. When we started developing that, and that uses AI technology, we just called it machine learning because that was the word that people use. And it was not generative AI. So it's not the actual current, version of the technology that people are using. It was supervised learning and other different approaches, but it was still machine learning and artificial intelligence. And so the technology has come a long way, from 2011, when we first started working on building out Alexa as a service, to certainly between 2011 and 2014 when Alexa launched, and also certainly now, and in particular over the last 3 years with the real broad scale rollout of generative AI. My personal opinion is that AI is just going to be the new software, and that all software, regardless of what field it's in, regardless of what space it's in, will be augmented and or generated by AI. And because software has permeated now every single aspect of every single company in the world, regardless of what field they're in, they are relying on software. If you're a landscape business, you are using software on the back end to run your business in some way, shape, or form. So it doesn't matter what type of business you're in, software is now part of that norm, and AI will, intervene in that business to make it more efficient, by enabling either that software to be created almost wholly by AI or certainly augmented and improved by AI, and it'll take tasks away. So I absolutely see that trend continuing, and AI becoming not necessarily a less talked about topic, but a one that, as people become more familiar with it personally, and as companies become more familiar with deploying it across all areas of the business, that just gets less airtime and becomes more accepted in the same way that mobile does.
Yeah, good stuff. I think a lot of folks have thought about, AI did exist before ChatGPT, and Alexa being, I think, a primary example in people's minds of a device that you've interacted with that does use a technology of AI. Greg, this has been fascinating. Thanks so much for sharing your expertise.
Thank you very much,
with us.
Paul. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for tuning into The Cusp. We're available wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to subscribe. You can visit us at thecusp.ai. The launch of this podcast was made possible by the collective philanthropic support of the Walmart Foundation, GitLab Foundation, Cognizant, and the Capeware Center. Thanks to our supporters and to you all for listening. Catch you next time.